Now, here is the choice that we have to make according to this group. We have here a scales that balances two different things. On one side, we have gold bars. Don't they look good? I'd just like to have some of those gold bars. On the other side of the scales, the entire planet. I think this is a false choice for two reasons. Number one, if we don't have a planet, the other reason is that if we do the right thing, then we're going to create a lot of wealth and we're going to create a lot of jobs. Because doing the right thing moves us.
Alright guys, welcome back on the Middle Way, and on today's episode we are talking about climate change. And but before we get into the episode, I'm gonna introduce myself. I am Crossy the Kid, my co-host
Tommy Tells.
and our guest
Alan Gutherson.
Alan Gutherson.
Pleasure, man.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I worked for a long time in computing. About 15 years ago I got concerned about climate change, read an article in The Age, sort of thought, this is trivial, we just got to tell everyone about it, we'll fix it all up in a year or two. But then it became clear it was a lot harder than that. So I've been working now for the last 15 years as a climate activist, member of Extinction Rebellion. Arrested a few times.
Oh wow.
Total 10 times. In fact, I brought my t-shirt. My Extinction
representing
The passion.
Extinction Rebellion. So this is a special shirt I got for being arrested. So I've been arrested 10 times now.
Okay, you got a
wow.
special. It's like arrested.
Arrested.
I was taken down.
Yeah. So I've got to go to court in a month's time. We were arrested for sitting outside Flinders Street Station and refusing to move.
Yeah.
There you go, we've got a fugitive on the show. Exclusive here, ladies and gentlemen. Exclusive. You know what? There was a little clip that
Oh yeah.
I just want to show you.
Maybe you used to it.
This is like a brief explanation of kind of why we're here to discuss climate change.
Hello, I'm from the government with an important message as we enter the third decade of the 21st century. Things are going, fine. Overall, the Amazon is fine, half of Africa is fine, so is the Arctic, Indonesia, Spain, Greece, even Greenland's on fucking fire. I mean fine. Scientists have coined a new term for this stage of climate change we're entering. We're fucked. Unlike the previous stage, which climate scientists called listen to us or we might be fucked, we're fucked is happening and in your lifetime. This is thanks to us wasting decades piss-farting around at climate summits with non-binding emission targets, whilst handing out subsidies to climate criminals, obstructing renewables, and generally not giving a shit that rising CO2 levels are about to trigger what scientists call feedback loops. A feedback loop is the scientific term for when a species uses its own ignorance to screw itself and everything else around it so hard that its own planet tells it to git fo. Some people are already experiencing we're fucked, such as these Pacific nations facing rising sea levels, who recently begged Australia to please stop burning coal, to which Australia responded, get fucked. The combination of we're fucked and get fucked will cause wars to break out over access to food and water, except in America, where the chosen one will just nuke hunger. Would you like to know more? But please don't panic. If the realization that we're fucked troubles you, why not ride a bike to work, have shorter showers, or send thoughts and prayers? Just don't join the global climate strike this September or Extinction Rebellion in October, because a sustained collective movement would force us to take drastic action and turn this ship around, which might just be doable if enough of you demand it. Or you could go to Area 51 and demand to see the aliens, in which case, we're definitely fucked. This has been a message from your local government franchise.
That was an interesting clip. That pretty much explains what climate change is in a nutshell. But you've been studying this for like the last 15 years, right?
Yep.
Okay, so tell me, you brought graphs and stuff like that. Can you explain what the graphs are and what data you brought here today?
Well, that's the main initial graph, if you like, which came out 15 years ago, and it shows the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere averaged. So basically, it's showing it's increasing from about 320 up to 420 parts per million, which doesn't sound much, but the problem is that what carbon dioxide does is it acts like a blanket. So there's a blanket all over the Earth, and it just stops the heat escaping back into space.
And that's the greenhouse effect, I believe.
That's the greenhouse effect.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So as that goes up, you get temperatures going up, and these are the temperature graphs for the last, since 1880, and you see they steadily going up here, and this is where we are here. The really concerning thing is that if you look at the last 2 years, there's a year there, the year before, last year suddenly jumped up enormously.
Okay, so it says 1880 on here, right?
Yep.
The data from 1880 to the 19th century, do you know anything on how they extracted the data?
Look, I don't know the details of it. A lot of them are just general recordings that they've had. I think these are, well, later ones, they've had been able to track it from space and get a much more accurate feeling over the whole, all of the Earth. But back there, they would have just been normal ground recordings that weather stations made, things like that, and they just averaged them out.
I was going to say, put the mic a little bit closer.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
And yeah, I was going to add to that, I guess 1880 would have been one of the starts, considering that was when the Industrial Revolution began in the 1880s, when all the big factories started being produced in Great Britain for the first time. I think it was in Yorkshire. They started building the world's first factories. They had some manufactories in the 1700s, but the first official power plants and big industrial factories were in the 1870s and 1880s, when mass amounts of coal were being churned up in the furnace and pumped out into the atmosphere. So, yeah, I could see that in the 1880s for sure.
So yeah, that's basically when we started burning fossil fuels.
For the first time.
And that's where it all kicked off. We burn the fossil fuels, makes carbon dioxide, stays in the atmosphere. Every time you create carbon dioxide, goes up in the atmosphere, and on average it takes 120 years for that carbon dioxide to come out again.
That's nuts, real
120 years is the half-life. So half of it comes out in 120 years, 3/4 of it comes out in 250 years.
Isn't like half-life, isn't like radiocarbon half-life?
That's exactly the same idea.
Oh, it's the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, the half-life is, if you put up a ton of carbon dioxide, half of it will stay up there for 120 years, and so it slowly decays. And we've been putting it up in there really quickly, and once it's got up there, it's going to stay there for a really long time. So the problems we create today, if we get into shit, which we are going to get into, that's going to take a long time for it to recover afterwards.
That sucks a lot.
And I'll just show you that graph. That's another graph of the temperature. And you can see these are various years along the bottom, and you'll see that these are back in 1880. As you go up higher, they get higher, the Earth gets hotter, and you see here, I'm just reading the graph back to front, yep, just over here, last year in June, that June was the hottest June ever, The next month, July, was the hottest July ever. Then the hottest September, the hottest October, the hottest November, the hottest December, January for this year, February, March. So the last 8 months have been the hottest times for those months ever.
No way.
And it's a big jump. I mean, it used to just jump up and down. 8 months ago, it suddenly jumped up. We don't know why.
Okay, so I'm curious. This graph, I'm assuming these numbers are the degrees that it went up by.
Well, they're actually, I think it's standard deviations, but it's effectively degrees, yes.
Okay, so this scale is the years.
No,
okay?
this is the months of the year.
Yep.
So this is back sort of 1880, it bubbled up and down like that, 1881, etc. And you'll see that as we get down further, the more recent years are in lighter colours. So it's gradually been going up, but the last 10 months
Yes.
went off the scale. No one knows why. It might just come back again and everything will be cool. Or it might just keep going up. And that's the thing that's worried us, is that lots of scientists have been
It's a big
saying
what if, that one.
you hit tipping points. The idea of a tipping point is where you lose control of the situation.
It's
Oh,
basically
bro, this
like
is
pushing
rough.
the car.
You know what? You know, I just realised
That's it.
that your mic has not been on for like the first 10 minutes.
Oh,
because mic 2 has been
no.
on. You know what? This whole thing has been kind of a car crash to begin with. But you know what? Hey, I don't mind. We can start again.
Oh, we just keep, yeah.
We can keep going
Let's
from
keep
here,
going.
bro. But I'm so sorry, bro. I'm trying to this. But hey, let's keep moving.
You've still got mic 2 off, have you?
No, you were mic 3.
3. Okay, yeah.
But I thought you were mic 2,
Okay.
right? And under the assumption,
they
because
just
I could
wrote it.
hear you, but I could hear you through his mic.
No,
my
what?
mic.
What? No.
I didn't know that I couldn't. And
I-
we're all
yeah.
listening to the same thing, right? So now you can hear your voice, yes?
Yep, I can hear myself now.
We're using other people's equipment and something was bound to happen.
It doesn't matter. We're here now.
Yeah, but back on that point, yeah, so not to get sidetracked, so
With that graph, don't mind if I take a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that the standard deviation is slowly, which is the carbon.
It's the amount of, it's the temperature. It's measuring the temperature of the Earth and how far is it deviating from what it used to be before the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, that's the line.
Yep.
Yep. And then everything that's after that is after the Industrial Revolution. And basically, as you can see, the deviation gets more and more and more and more. And then, as you said, as of the beginning of this year, it's now hit record highs, which is first time ever recorded.
But it's
in-
substantially heavier.
Yeah,
It's like quarter of a
way
degree.
high. Yeah.
We were talking about keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees. Right? That was, they said the whole aim was to keep it beyond 1.5 when we got to 250. Last year it hit 1.5. It jumped from 1.3 up to 1.5. Now next year it might go back to 1.3 again. The worry is it might go up to 1.6 next year.
Okay, so I got a question. Today, I was speaking to this guy who studies statistics, and he was saying that the way that they kind of gathered data prior to the industrial age, which was a main argument I would like to say against climate change, because most of the graph is from the 1800s onwards, which, you know, I guess you can get a fair analysis of weather from 1880s to now. But prior to that, they would cut open trees, and the rings on the trees would define how cold the conditions were, how hot the conditions were, which I thought was interesting. A lot of the captain's logs would tell, they would write down the degree of the water
Yep.
before the industrial age. And I thought this was interesting because a lot of people that talk about this stuff, they always say, well, the data isn't sufficient enough, and you know what, there's not enough science to know much about it. And to be honest, for the last at least 2 months of me kind of going through a lot of videos and going through a lot of the research, a lot of it goes over my head, even reading the graphs,
Look,
even hearing this stuff. So in terms of looking at all this stuff, and there's a lot of substantial evidence in terms of things have been changing with technology and with the industrial age, but prior to this whole idea of natural disasters and natural occurrences, the influxation between the two, I haven't seen a graph of those two. I've only seen one graph of this and one graph of this.
Look, there is data going all the way back, but it's
Yes.
different data. I mean, they didn't have satellites to measure the temperature of the Earth.
Yes.
They didn't have accurate thermometers in lots of places around the Earth. A lot of it was just people recording data, and they've had to infer a lot of stuff. And I agree, it's not. They're doing the best job they can, but the data that we get now on temperature is far more accurate than we're using from 300, 400 years ago. But it's pretty clear that it has never been this hot in recent history.
Yeah, it's definitely getting a lot hotter by what it shows here.
I mean, you go back to the glaciers, and there were glaciers, and then the glaciers all took over the whole Earth in sheets of glass, of ice, and then they all disappeared again. So obviously the temperatures were changing. And I do actually have a graph which, I mean, I don't know how well you can interpret it. This shows CO2 levels.
Yep.
As glaciers occurred, glaciations, and you've got this here. This is the increase in CO2 for one glacial period, and here's another one here. This is our CO2 from this one.
And
it's gone
CO2
through the
for
roof.
people that don't
So
know.
linear correlation between the increase in CO2 and the deglacial process.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that again, we watched the movie documentary with Al Gore called An Inconvenient Truth.
Yes.
We watched that.
That was the
Interesting
first
one.
video I saw on
Yeah,
this.
and
All right, guys. So I messaged Al Gore to see if he'd like to come on as a guest, maybe via Zoom. But unfortunately, he didn't come on. But hey, I was glad I got a response.
he goes into great detail about how big mountains, one of them such as Mount Kilimanjaro, has no longer snow on it as much as what it used to have decades ago. It has lost a lot of its snow, and a lot of places in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of mountains have just lost a lot of their snow. A lot of ice sheets are withdrawing, glaciers are withdrawing too. So, yeah, it's a worldwide thing, and we can all see that.
I mean, one of the things, when the glaciers, if all the ice on the North Pole and the South Pole melted, the seas would rise about 100 metres.
It's be
And
intense.
That is absolutely enormous. And people sort of say, it'll never happen in our lifetime. And that's true. The blocks of ice are sort of kilometres thick. So if you think a kilometre block of ice, over a year you might melt it back a metre or so. To melt a whole 1 kilometre thick lump of ice, it's going to take you 1,000 years. So it's not going to happen in our lifetime. But once you get to the temperature of 1.5 degrees, it starts melting. And then it keeps melting forever until it's gone, or until you get back to 1.5 degrees.
That's the tipping point, like we said
It's a
earlier.
tipping point.
It's
It
a tipping
starts,
point.
starts melting, and it just keeps melting.
That is bad.
And, I mean, we tend to think in 20-year periods, not 100, 200-year periods, and we're leaving a time bomb for future generations.
And that's pretty much the most biggest thing about
Really
climate
are.
change in general. I think that it's even not really about, what we have like right now. It's basically trying to make sure that what have we got for the future? That's like the big question, because today it's fine. What about tomorrow? What about next week? Or next month, or next year, or next decade, next century? What happens then? What kind of world would it be like if this keeps going the way it does? It's a concern. I do see why people care about it, and I'd also see at the same time why people will say, what can I do? Look at me. I've got my own problems. I can't deal with this. Like I've got, too much on my plate. I can't deal with all this stuff. And then they'll say that, it's bigger than me. I'm just one person.
Is there a like I got two parts, all right? So is there a cross reference between data from different countries?
In what way? What do you mean?
Like in terms of, say, for example, right? Is this data from the world or data from America?
No, that's data from the world.
Okay.
So it's I don't know exactly how they measure it. It's a place in Europe that's been doing it for years,
Yep.
and you have to accept that they're doing what they're measuring is valid. I mean, you can never check.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking, like, if different countries are studying the same thing, say Australia has, somebody that studies climate, then you have America, then you have Russia, then you have China, and then you gather all that data and then make a graph.
That's what
If
these
that's
are doing.
what this is,
Yeah.
then, hey, I think that's very concerning. But if people have two different kind of variations of data in terms of climate, because it depends on where in the world you are, is depending on where you're
It does.
affected. And in Australia, we're under the microscope, especially with the fucking ozone layer. So I think in terms of the protests and stuff, I can see why it's so serious.
Yeah, and that is the other thing. People talk about 1.5 degrees averaged over the whole world as a temperature increase. What that means, though, is that there's some points, like the Arctic, is heating up much quicker. It's heated up about 4 degrees.
That's bad.
And it's because it's a different environment. And so 1.5 degrees doesn't mean you have to turn up your air conditioner by 1.5 degrees to cope with it. It's far more than that. You're going to have changes in your weather patterns, changes in your rainfall. Those rainfalls will lead to changes in food production. I mean, in some cases, you might be able to produce more food.
Yeah.
And generally, as it gets hotter and drier, you produce less food. And there's a whole, I mean, your fish are in the ocean heats up, so they move away from the equator.
Mhm.
When they move, there may not be food for them there.
It's all animal migrations too. It impacts all of it. It's the environment in itself. And I was just about to get to that. Like, at first when I heard about the environment under attack, it was under the term global warming. That's when I heard about it back when I was at school, like decades ago. Global warming was the term that they used. And nowadays they refer to it as climate change, because what is happening is that some places of the world are definitely getting warmer overall, but then other places are actually just having like the opposite effect. They might be getting colder. So basically it's just creating extremely violent differences in weather, where some places are getting too much of something and other places are getting not enough. So too much water here, not enough water there. Like it's too hot here, too cold there.
That's a good question in terms of like whether that's on the flip side, a natural occurrence or not a natural occurrence. But on another note, in Inconvenient Truth, he talks about how climate change affects not only different states of climate throughout the world, but also hurricanes and other natural disasters. So I thought that was an interesting fact, the fact that the sea rising can affect tornadoes and stuff like that. Which again, I don't know, Al Gore likes to kind of, accentuate things, but he does have a point though, so.
I mean, that's the thing. As the ocean, I mean, what causes cyclones and tornadoes is when the water heats up, and it'd be different to the earth, to the land temperatures. So you get a temperature differential. Once you get a temperature differential between two places, you get much more disturbances. And I think of it as, if you look at a river, you'll see it flowing past, and there's turbulence in it. Right? You increase the height of the river by a foot or so, and not only do you get a lot more water flowing through, you get a lot more turbulence and a lot more energy in there, and that turbulence is like hurricanes. You're increasing those occurrences, and they're being more often and more powerful. And I mean, the whole problem with this is we don't know what's going to happen. We just know that there's potentially lots of things that could go wrong. If any one of them goes really wrong, for instance, there's a place up in Russia. They've got the permafrost, where the ground has been frozen over thousands of years, and as it froze, it absorbed methane from what happened was that the plants would grow, they would die in water, and when plants rot, they create methane. And it's been trapped in the permafrost. So what happens is the Earth has started heating, that permafrost has started melting and gives off methane. And methane is about 100 times worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So that methane that's given off is heating the Earth. So once the Earth heats more of the tundra melts, which creates more methane, which goes up and creates the Earth heating. So you've got the potential for a feedback loop which you can't stop.
It's a never-ending domino effect by the
That's
sounds
right.
of it.
And people have done calculations on it, and they reckon that the amount of methane there, buried in the tundra, is has a larger effect than all the fossil fuels we've ever burned. So if that all burns, if that all melts, we could be up shit creek. Now, I can't prove it. No one's really done all the measurements, and when trying to calculate how much methane's buried in it is really difficult. But that's a potential risk that we've got to try and avoid, because there's too many ways you can get runaway climate change. There's a current up in the Atlantic which goes from, just showing it roughly on a map, right? This is America and Europe, and there's a current that carries hot water from the equator up to the poles, and then that brings cold water back again. And that circulates water, and it's an enormous amount of water that's moving, right? And it's moving, and it helps to keep Europe warm, and it helps to move heat from the equator up to the poles, and effectively cools the Earth down. That current has reduced in speed by about 15%. Right? Now you say,
Really? That's
what difference does that make? I don't know. If it's possible that it'll stop altogether, because the reason why it works is because there's a temperature difference. The equator's really hot, and the poles are really cold. I said before the poles are warming up more, so you get less flow happening. Don't know what that'll do.
I just realised I think that might just be because in general, warm water or hot water tends to move faster than cold water. So it would make sense that if there's hot water around the equator, it would then spread out, and then the cold water would then mix with it, which I guess is how that current would work. And now that's not happening because, climate change.
Well, I got two questions. Okay, so current. What is current? Is it the speed of the water, or is it the temperature, or is it both? And on the flip side, methane, is that the same thing that we use to cook? Okay, so fracking is a part of methane.
Yep, fracking creates methane, and one of the problems that we have is that fracking, there's a lot of methane escapes into the atmosphere. Right? The idea is that they basically blow up the soil, blow up all the rocks underneath, and so that the methane can leak out, and they try and catch it all.
Yep.
They don't catch it all. When you dig up coal, that releases methane from the coal seams. We don't catch that either. And the coal industry has been saying for years, don't you worry about that, there's not much escaping. They've taken measurements, and it looks like they're about a factor of 3 out in the amount that they say is coming out to what's actually coming out. Don't know what impact that'll have, but as I said before, methane's 100 times worse than CO2. I don't know.
Well, I was going to say that these are obviously, I think when people speak about these, so-called natural events that are happening, their minds are not focused on this kind of stuff. They're always, again, what's right in front of me in life,
That's right.
Well, what do I have to do today? And they would never really ever comprehend these kinds of things about the environment, what's going on with the environment. No, I just want to do what I got to do today. But what can I say? You fellas at Extinction Rebellion, you're raising your voices now. I think people are well aware that, there's something profoundly messed up about how we treat the environment. I think that's kind of self-evident nowadays. That's for sure.
I think it's
we can't ignore it. We can't ignore it no more.
It's that whole Jordan Peterson thing where he's like, clean your room first before you worry about the environment. But it's irony, because I think that whole principle is based upon the same idea as waste management. You Like if everyone took responsibility, that was a big word. If everyone took responsibility of their own emissions and their own waste, then I think collectively that will create change. But that being said, creating a law around that where everyone is responsible is going to create a lot of havoc in terms of dictatorship and stuff like that.
People don't understand the extent to which a legislation like this can go. I'll give you a few examples. And this happened just this past summer. So in Queensland, they offered a $400 rebate for the PickSmart scheme to households that would install smart meters for their aircon systems. Guess what happened? 170,000 air conditioners were turned down or turned off 6 times in some of the hottest days. What does that mean? That means that these companies, through the smart meters, were able to log into your homes to turn down the air conditioners. And now let's take a quick step back to Davos in 2022. What happened that year? The WEF was discussing the development of a technology to track everybody's carbon footprint. And they've been promoting apps like this so that you can track your carbon footprint and even by category. So your household, which goes back to what happened in Queensland this summer, your car, how much petrol have you consumed this week? Listen to this.
We're developing through technology an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So individual carbon footprint tracker.
How much petrol have you consumed? How many flights have you taken? Have you been traveling too much? How much meat have you bought? Nowadays, God forbid eating meat, especially red meat. Have you been eating too much meat? No, that can't happen. How much have you been using aircon too much? Has it been a very hot summer? You've been keeping the aircon on every day? And because less and less people use cash nowadays, by having access even just to your bank accounts, right? Through your spendings, they will know everything they need to know about you.
So there's a flip side to that. Like look at recycling, right? Recycling, great idea. Love recycling. But on the flip side of that, if recycling was like, say, for example, Singapore, Australia would not be the land of the free. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because America's the same. They're like, wow, you know what? I want to get drunk, throw a cheeseburger out the window, you know, and you know, throw condoms on the ground, whatever. It doesn't matter, you know, because that's their idea of freedom, you know, degenerate lifestyle, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be exactly like that, but the whole idea of freedom is different for everyone else because freedom collectively is to have a clean place to live, right? But freedom is also having the freedom to be self-destructive. And I think there's a fine line collectively to have responsibility of both of those poles of kind of like personality traits, I think.
I'd agree with you that we should have the freedom, if you want to make life for yourself chaotic or destructive, go ahead and do it. That's your problem.
Yes.
But we don't have the right for your freedom to impact the billions of other people on the earth. We have a responsibility to act in the interests of everyone else. And unfortunately, humans tend to say, I want to do what's for me, not what's for everyone else.
Yeah.
And so you have to have laws to enforce it. We have laws to say that you behave yourself on the roads. You don't get drunk, because if you go out in the roads when you're drunk, you're likely to kill someone else. You don't have the right to throw your rubbish in someone else's river.
This all comes back to what I was saying earlier about how when I've learnt this new word, hygonophobia, but I believe I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but basically hygonophobia is the fear of taking responsibility and accountability for one's actions. And our society reeks of hygonophobia. We have so much freedom to do things, and yet no one wants to be responsible for their mess. They just do whatever the hell they want. And I don't know if that's an excess of freedom. I don't know if it's because it's an institutional problem, but I think that it would have to come down to either it's a bit of both, or who knows? Maybe there's something here that we're not, paying attention to. That's got us, both sides wrong. And either way, there has to be a change in how we run things. I do agree with that. There has to be a big change in how we run things around here.
I think level of priorities is the same thing, though.
Yeah.
In terms of waste management, and then you have climate change. Is that underneath the same umbrella, or is it not? And also, in terms of ways to counteract solutions towards that, is renewable sources of power. Which one is going to be the less? Like, a lot of people when we switched to paper bags. And everyone was like, you know what, this is great. This is great. We're not doing the plastic anymore, which is bullshit in my opinion, because the reason why I say it's bullshit, I'm not saying it's not bullshit in terms of using plastic. We shouldn't use as much plastic, right? Because plastic is created from methane, from petrol, which is fossil fuels.
I think.
It's all oils. It's very bad, right?
And it hangs around for so long too.
Yes. And it doesn't degrade. But there was biodegradable options in terms of using stuff like, other plastic bags to create new plastic bags, which I thought was a bit fishy because I worked at a recycling plant and that never fucking happened. But on the flip side to that, they do have stuff like, where they use like pastas and stuff to make bags and forks and stuff like that. But again, the government said that costed too much. Yet cutting down a shitload of trees and making little paper bags is more cost efficient. But yet we have to pay more for that. What the fuck, bro? Like, I don't get that. That spins my mind, bro. Same thing with the coffee cups. It's the same thing, man. It's like, hey, you know what? We're going to cut down the trees because guess what? We can grow them again, but you can't regrow the same fucking plastic that's going to sit there and never degrade, I don't know. I guess the whole point of what I'm trying to say is like, how do you create renewable sources of energy that is less costing in terms of the planet? Because, you have fracking, which is like, oh, hey, this is bad, but we have methane to cook with, which is kind of good in a way. But on the flip side, you have coal, which is very bad, but on the other side, it's creating productivity. Then you have lithium, which is digging up the earth, but also creating trenches and holes in the earth as well, which is bad. So how do you create? It's like a measure of pros and cons, I guess.
The human mind is not comprehended to deal with the expanse of the environment. We're only designed to deal with our own personal problems. So it's always going to be an issue of trying to, I've got to look out for the world before myself, but most people are just, instinctually going to be like, I've got to watch out for myself, and then I might take care of, things around me. And I see it everywhere. People just trying to look out for themselves. It's, again, don't know if it's a problem with freedom, don't know if it's a problem with institutional policies, but one thing I do want to get at is just the because at the beginning we were talking about the very basics of climate change, and I was going to say, Alan, what is your definition of climate change?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's just basically it's caused by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, burning from fossil fuels, and it is changing the structure of the world mainly by just increasing the CO2 in the atmosphere, which will change the weather in unpredictable ways. We know it'll get hotter. We know it'll get more stormy. It'll get more wet in some places and get drier in others. So the climate throughout the world will change and keep changing in an unpredictable way. We don't know how bad it'll get. There will be some places which are better off. Most places, though, will be worse off. And so I suppose that's what climate change is. It's just the changing of the world's weather from what we've been used to and got used to over the last 2,000 years to an environment that we don't know.
What about adaptability? Like look at Ice Age, right? You've got the Ice Age, and then we had to adapt to that period of time. And then maybe adaptability in a cave where it's permanent darkness, but then your hearing gets sharper. You know what I mean?
Oh, look,
so in that
we
predicament,
might adapt. The problem with adapting is that it's going to be expensive and difficult,
yes,
right? And it won't be perfect. I would think you're far better not creating the problem rather than trying to solve it otherwise. Because, I mean, for instance, one of the things that people have said is if the Earth's getting too hot, we just send spaceships up in the air to protect us, to keep the sun off us.
Yeah.
Right? And that'll stop it heating up. The problem is, though, the CO2 also changes the acidity of the sea.
It changes a
absorbs
lot of things,
CO2.
yeah.
I mean, they've been measuring seashells. The thickness of seashells has reduced over the last 50 years.
Water acidity is a really big problem.
Yeah,
It's actually, I think it even might be more scary than climate change, just turning the water into fucking acid. That is bad.
Yep.
Like, no, I mean, that is really bad. And this is, I think, like, a lot of people say, oh, but, you know, when I watched because obviously we did a few interviews on the street and whatnot, and people said it was all stupid. But then I'm like, what about the toxicity in the environment? What about acid rain? What about all this pollution? Just like bad breathing, bad water, bad chemicals in the soil. What about that? And they're like, oh, no, that's pretty bad. So even they agree that they might not think that we're going to be underwater, but just in general, there's so many toxic chemical pollutants that are literally turning the world into acid, which is bad, very bad.
It would be slow, and we don't know the effect of it. But the problem is that if the seashells are not as thick as they used to be, that means they're not absorbing as much carbon dioxide as they used to. What a seashell does, it absorbs CO2 out of the water to make its shell, and that shell falls down the bottom of the ocean, gets covered with silt, and disappears out of the environment.
Oh wow!
That's not working as well now because the shells aren't absorbing as much CO2. I don't know where that leads us to.
It leads us to an excess of carbon and other various chemicals just floating around. In the atmosphere, really.
It may be another
interesting.
feedback loop.
Yeah.
They don't absorb it. They release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and so the level keeps going up, even if we're not putting more in the air.
Everything is literally becoming increasingly more toxic. Like, people would always say that, you know, for instance, there is one thing I do know, which is kind of bad, because in China, right, it's been said that they have the most amount of carbon emissions in the entire world. Like right now, they do.
In total, not per person.
Not per capita, but in total, they are emitting the most. And there's some places in China where if you breathe the air, take in like 24 hours of air, just 1 day's worth of air, it's equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes. And now, of course, that's just the, you know, remote industrial places in one part of that country. But over time, imagine if there's unrestrained pumping of chemicals and carbon into the atmosphere. Eventually, you know, we're all going to become like, we're all going to have smoking breath at one point if this is unrestrained, just pumping crap into our atmosphere. That's, yeah, like you said, where does the carbon go? Where is it? It's just an endless cycle because it doesn't get reabsorbed back into the environment. It just remains pumped up into our atmosphere, which is, again, bad.
So you were saying that the shells, how they form is by absorbing the carbon, right?
Well, as they grow the shell, they absorb carbon dioxide to make it, I think it's calcium carbonate.
Yes.
The carbonate is the carbon. So they absorb carbon out of the water, carbon dioxide out of the water, to make the calcium carbonate. They're not making as much shell as they used to.
Okay. No, I was thinking maybe you could create like a filter using that, but they don't absorb once they've been formed. That sounds super stupid. But you get what I'm saying? Like once it's been formed, you can't absorb anything anymore.
Oh, they just grow the shell bigger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that could work in a way, I guess. Yeah.
But they've been doing it for years. They're doing it less now, which is going to mean that more carbon stays in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before sort of what's the underlying problem. It would be nice if people could say, I will look after my own emissions, I'll stop my own emissions, I'll put solar panels on my roof, I'll put my own battery in, won't use any power from the grid, I'll have an electric car and I'll charge that and I'll do all of that stuff. And people are doing that, but it's a small part of the community which are willing to make that effort. I would effort maybe 20% if we're lucky. You've got to get the 100%. The only way to get the 100% is the government that says, for the
Law.
good of the world, you've got to do this. And
Yeah.
to the credit of the Victorian government, in January they said, when you build a house now, you're not allowed to hook gas up to it. Because gas is stupid.
Yeah, I
You
agree
could-
with that.
you could
It's
build a-
cheap.
No, it's not. I've just converted my house and I'm running it cheaper now off electricity than I was off gas.
Really?
Yep.
That's awesome.
It's cheaper. But people have got this feeling that gas is not. It's quicker.
Yeah, I think that might have been
Right.
the word I was needing to use. Quicker.
I used to be able to heat my house in about half an hour. Now it takes probably 2 hours in the morning, so I have to set it on earlier. But when I get up, it's still the same temperature, right? But the government said it's stupid having gas. We're not going to have gas around in 2050 because we're going to be carbon neutral by then,
Yes.
which probably means we'll turn off the gas network in around about 2040. So anyone who puts in a gas heater, gas hot water service, it's got 15 years before you won't be able to get any gas for it.
And it's just because they're just going to...
They're going to turn it off.
They're going to basically phase it out.
It's got to be
altogether.
phased out sometime.
We
They're
see
not
this-
game to say when, but they're starting by saying no new house will have gas.
Yeah. So this is where I guess it goes from, we already know that carbon is, great amounts of it are being pumped into the atmosphere, but it comes between the so-called society and then, or just the individual freedom of an individual, and then the institutions, be it the government and, of course, like we said at the beginning, the corporations, the companies and whatnot with these huge industrial power plants that mass produce pretty much all the products we have in our society, because most of it is made through factories and whatnot. And now we got to look at where are we going to approach first. Are we going to get every individual to stop, or are we going to stop with the big factories from producing all this carbon? That's the big question.
I think the answer is all of the above.
All of them.
You've got to
yeah.
do this a lot. I mean, and there are industries are starting to get on board with it. There are technologies now. For instance, the way you used to make forge stuff to make a metal casting was that you would you'd heat up a whole sort of oven to get it really hot. You'd put the thing in there, then you'd pour the molten metal in there to fill the thing, and you'd do that just by pouring buckets of heat into it. What they can do now is they have the moulding, they put the raw metal in there, then they use like an induction cooker, so it just heats the metal. And the metal melts and fills the forge. Rather than heating the whole oven, it's just the bit that you want to make, and it's far more efficient. It's like the difference between, we used to have ovens, convention ovens, where you heat the oven to cook your roast or cook your vegetables. Now you stick them in a microwave and just heat the thing you're cooking. So much more efficient. And so there are mechanisms that are coming out for industry which can stop them using so much enormous amounts of heat and do it smarter.
Well, then I guess the big question is why haven't all the corporations and companies changed to using more methods like that? Why do they still use their old methods?
Because you've got to make investments.
Yeah.
It's new equipment. But you should be saying, if I'm building a factory now, I should do it the new way. I shouldn't say, I've had cheap gas for the last 50 years, I'll burn gas to do it. You should be saying, the future is renewable electricity. That's what's going to be driving us in 50 years' time. And then by 2050, start getting there now.
Is there a way to farm methane without it being a danger?
Getting rid of it?
Or farming it.
What do you mean?
So So with the permanent frost before, right?
Permafrost, yes.
Permafrost. Okay, so when that was melting, methane was being released.
Yes.
So if you could farm that for your own independent thing, so you're not fracking.
Yeah.
Is that a possible way for us to still use gas, but it'll be less consumerist damage? Does that make sense?
It's really, I mean, you're talking about it being spread over thousands of square kilometres. Right? You got to put out a big plastic bag to collect it all. It's not coming out that fast, but it's coming out over such a large area that there's a huge volume, and you just can't collect it.
Okay.
I mean, they do it in rubbish tips. Rubbish tips, when stuff decays in them, they create methane. They do now put plastic covers over the top to collect the methane and generate energy from it.
I think cow farts contribute a bit as well.
Sorry,
I think cows farting contribute a bit of methane too.
shit.
I mean, they say that there's like cows do contribute quite a bit.
Basically, the coffee that we all drink emits between 15 and 20 tons of CO2 per ton of coffee. So we should all know that this is every time we drink coffee, we are basically putting CO2 into the atmosphere. One of the reasons is because most of the coffee plantation, or most of the coffee is produced through monoculture, and monoculture is also affected by climate change.
Indirectly, as the world gets richer, people stop being vegetarians and start eating meat. And that is a big contributor to climate change. We may have to say, stop eating beef.
Eating beef. So not necessarily stop eating meat altogether, but just watch out for the beef.
I'm not sure. Beef, I think, is the worst.
Yep.
But, yeah. I love my beef too much.
No, I mean, that's the thing. You see, it's like we're all, whether we like to admit it or not, we're all contributing to climate change. It's the absolute truth.
I mean, being alive, you're always contributing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that because, you know the show The Project?
Yep.
Okay, so I got asked by The Project, which is going to be a part of the episode. They were asking people whether they should put I think it was CO2 emissions on meat packets to prevent people from eating meat. And I don't know, I just thought that was an interesting concept.
If your favourite dinner is steak night, you might not be a fan of what's to come.
We love our lamb chops and our beef. It's delicious and it's nutritious.
With the issue of climate change not going away anytime soon, the government's official new dietary guidelines look set to factor in the environmental impact of certain foods.
I do try to choose foods that are good for the climate.
We'd be very silly to disconnect what we eat from where it comes from and how it comes to be in front of us. And so whenever dietary guidelines are considered, they have to include everything from the creation of the food through to the eating of it.
Things like steak and lamb chops could soon be on the chopping block, with guidelines tipped to recommend a reduced intake of red meat, which produces a carbon footprint almost 9 times higher than chicken.
I'm anticipating that these guidelines will include recommendations to encourage consumers to look at what kind of farming methods, how far it's travelled, what kind of packaging.
It's a move that has sparked outrage among the country's red meat producers.
We see it as a clear overreach. We would have the concern that the consumers will steer away from products such as red meat under the misguided apprehension that it may not be environmentally sustainable.
It may be a hard sell for consumers as well. Australia has one of the highest levels of red meat consumption in the world. In 2022, the average Aussie ate around 23.7 kilograms of beef, while the global average was just 6.3.
If cows are creating emissions, wouldn't eating more cows prevent emissions in a way?
The industry's peak body is now pushing for the change to be scrapped.
The reality is that the red meat industry has reduced its carbon emissions by 64% since a baseline of 2005. We still have a carbon neutral target of 2030, which beats pretty much every government and any other industry in Australia.
So should sustainability be on the menu when it comes to Aussie eating habits?
Should we really eat plants, you know? Because they have feelings too, apparently.
I still think that, you know, in terms of population, overpopulation and stuff like that, that it's so overwhelming to go, oh, hey, we don't eat meat, but yet a lot of people get benefits from eating meat. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you got people with immune systems that are very bad that become carnivores and make miraculous recoveries, and then you have other people that eat heaps of meat and they get heaps sick as well. So it's kind of like it's like medicine. Everyone has a different thing. And needs different stuff. So I would like to believe that we could make these fake meat products and stuff like that, but even soy is destroying the planet. And all that stuff. So it's very interesting.
The underlying problem is consumption.
Yes.
And consumption comes from individuals, people saying, I need an iPhone, I need 2 iPhones, I need more comfort, etc. But it's also the fact that the population's growing. Right? And if you double the Earth's population, you've now doubled the amount of emissions from them. So population growth and consumption of those individuals is an issue, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to stop that. The only good thing with population growth is that people are now realising that you don't have to have kids to have a fulfilled life, and the number of people who are choosing not to have a family is increasing.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily a solution to the problem, though, because
it's part of it, though.
I understand. I understand. Like, I know for a fact China implemented a one-child policy for a reason. They had realized that they had too many people in their country, and for whatever reason it was, whether it was a strain on the country as a whole or there was just too much energy consumption, they just had to greatly restrict the population. But I think that when it comes to energy in regards to population, I had always heard about it, that there are so-called, I think in the actual documentary it was said that as of right now, they're consuming the total usage of 2.5 planet Earth's worth of resources or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, as of right now, maybe more than that. But I think like prior to the 20th century, this it was obviously, we're just averagely consuming a moderate amount where the so-called environment produced enough energy that was able to grow back. And I guess half the reason for that would be is that the population was always in check, and that would be due to a series of wars, famines, plague, whatever it may be. But the population was always, for most of history, at a stable level. It never got above a certain amount until industrialization, which became a mass explosion of energy, which led to an explosion in the population. However, I'm trying to see that, is there a way in which there can be this many people and yet consume a more sustainable amount of resources, or is it that there has to be a so-called great reduction in the population to sustain the amount of resources? That's it's a big thing. Like,
it's a good question, though.
And it's true, because most of human history, like, it's made it quite clear that every time populations grew too big, it would lead to a war, or it would lead to some kind of a disease spreading. And nowadays, that is no longer the case. We've had about 75 years, or maybe more, of general world peace since the end of the Second World War. And in the 1800s, also early 1800s, there was the introduction of the world's first vaccine. And now we've got an incredibly fast-growing population, and that's, as you said, incredible consumption of demand for more resources.
I mean, I think correlation, and maybe this is just conspiracy thing, but I think correlation between this whole idea of feminism and this whole like gay rights thing is contributing to this whole like the not wanting to have kids and overpopulation, and how can we subtly prevent people from having kids. Also, I always thought that cigarettes was a form of population control. Because think about it. How can you voluntarily get people to kill themselves without being classified as murder?
But
why do we feed people sugary crap that will kill you, bruv. But we're feeding it to it willingly because you want to. You get me? Yeah. Why do you think they put it on there? Because they don't want to be. They want to depopulate the planet, but they don't want to be the murderer.
I thought I just wanted better workers because nicotine makes you addicted and sugar makes you addicted too. So it's like, let's just get better, more fast, efficient workers, which is good for factories. I mean,
yeah.
Just going back to the population growth.
Of course.
The thing that gives me hope is that they've done studies in countries, and you look at these countries and it actually works. What you have to do first is educate the women, teach them about contraception, and so if they learn, then you fix up the health situation so that if you have one or two kids, you'll know that 2 kids will grow up and those 2 kids will look after you in your old age. Before you had to have 10 kids so that 2 survived to middle age and support you.
Like the reason I gave earlier. Yeah.
So if you can trust, if you educate the women and you fix up the health system, they will drop down to only having 2 kids and the population won't grow. It happened in Europe first. It happened in China. It's happened in Australia, America. The one place that it hasn't happened yet is Africa, because over there they don't have sufficient contraception, they don't have sufficient education, and they don't have sufficient health services.
When you say contraception, do you mean like the pill and like?
Yeah, if you provide contraception to the women, they'll stop getting pregnant. Because they don't want to. Well, generally they don't want to get pregnant. They might want to have 1 or 2 kids. They don't want to have 10 kids. They never wanted to. They only did it so that there was always there was enough to survive. And educate the women, and they look after it.
I was going to say, you go first.
It is interesting in terms of like, back to my point with the cigarettes thing. In terms of like the levels of, say, for example, people coming out as trans and stuff like that. The ratio changed from 1% to now it's like 5%. And I think that's a part of the brainwashing stuff that, or you could say that people are suppressing it and they're coming out open and stuff, but I think that's a part of like control and part of contraception by saying that men can have a baby now, So on another note, like if we stop women from having kids, you know what I mean, by giving them the education that they need for contraception, or to say religion isn't a part of it anymore, so that you can do whatever you want, because guess what? It's not pro-life or pro-choice anymore. It's just whatever you want, So I think that's all a part of it. But again, this is all conspiracy theory. This is just my own theory. But I think that's a part of the whole plan of this liberal agenda. But again, this is just my theory.
I was just saying, we'll get back to the population thing in a moment, but just in regards to Africa, the underlying key issue is that Africa is a giant continent. It's actually very big. It's there's obviously, it has had the most underdeveloped urban infrastructure out of all the continents in the world. It's the most underdeveloped. I believe that only within the last century, Africa just started actually getting properly irrigated, and now, only just now, it is starting to industrialize. Every other major Western country was already well irrigated. In fact, most countries in the world and continents were already well irrigated with an infrastructure well before the 20th century. It's just that in the West, it started the industry, and then in the later half of the 20th century, the rest of the world industrialized. Africa was still a whole century behind the rest of the world as a continent, and only now in parts of maybe East Africa, West Africa, especially North Africa, they're starting to begin this process, which, as you said, eventually the population will, reach that so-called replacement level, instead of going from about something like 10 to 13 kids per family or whatnot, which, as we've said, we all contribute to climate change, whether we like it or not. So eventually it will stabilize, but the thing is, there would have to be much much more drastic measures needed to ensure that the whole world is keeping a sustainable
I
energy
think
consumption.
economy has something to do with that too.
Well, this is what I was going to get into with the whole institutions and corporations, because I think that even though people such as yourself, you or me, could talk about and affect climate change, I believe that these big institutions really do hold all the power in the end, because they're the ones that make the laws. Like, you know, they're the ones that decide what comes and goes. You know, they're the ones that are going to choose what happens and what doesn't happen. And I mean, look, I'd hope that, you know, eventually we can clean things up, because, you know, it seemed like the world, from what I've read in books and seen, you know, just in documents, like, you know, that I think it was when, what was the name of this sailor? I think it was Magellan, Fernando Magellan.
Fernando Magellan.
Fernando Magalhães. He said that when he was sailing around the world, right, he said that when he would go into like the Caribbean or some of the tropics, he said that when one of his Portuguese sailors dipped his oar into the water that was only about like a meter or two deep, he said that at least 100 fishes would swim up to the oar and just start nibbling on it. You know, just like because it was, you know, clear water everywhere back then. There wasn't any pollution really. There was obviously some level, but not nearly as much, you know, the Industrial Revolution and whatnot. And you would just have all these sharks just casually swimming in there. Is it a school of sharks or something? I think it's a school of fish.
School of fish.
Yeah, sharks may be a different word, but you just had all these huge fishes, because this is way before, you know, 90% of the fish species went extinct, way before that. So all these kinds of fishes were just casually coming up to the boat, and they were just everywhere. And it just makes me think, like, yeah, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the world was literally teeming with life. It was everywhere that, you know, they went. Like, obviously not in the big cities, like, obviously not. But the moment you went out from the city, it was like, yeah, the wilderness was really something else, you know. And nowadays, it's like, you know, I feel like, you know, you go out into these rivers and oceans and whatnot, it's like, I don't know, it just seems like there's a lot less life in the world, you know? Like, yeah.
Remember the Wild West when they first started shooting fucking buffaloes? And
buffaloes, yeah,
the buffaloes almost got extinct.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was industrial age though.
It was during
It's just too many people coming in, taking over the land. They wanted to farm it. You had to get rid of the buffaloes. And it's not hard to get rid of a buffalo.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I
always thought it was just like greed, like they just wanted to keep eating buffalo.
Nah,
you know what I mean? They're just like, this tastes good. Let's get another one. We can't preserve them either because we live in the fucking 17th century, bruv.
You're not exactly wrong. I don't want to get off topic, but that was for 3 reasons. First reason was they did want more land because in the US, manifest destiny.
Yep.
Second reason was they hated the so-called American government, hated the so-called Comanche tribes, like viciously. And they lived off the buffalo, and they realized the only way to really get them is to get rid of the buffalo. So they tried to remove the buffalo because it was their main food supply. And then, of course, they also, again, greed. They just wanted more land ultimately because, you know, and of course, obviously, the Comanches occasionally raided the American, you know, colonists that were out in the open plains. So end of story, it was like, yeah, the they pretty much almost wiped out an entire species because it was a dick measuring competition. It's pretty horrible, the fact that, you know, most of these issues is literally just, it seems as if like people will try to do the right thing, but I reckon that once, you know, big egos, big corporations get in, I feel as if that's like the big problem. And who knows, maybe it's like, I don't know if you feel that way, but you feel like it's all of it's like an issue, personal issues and the wider world of the big corporate, you know, atmosphere. But
look, corporations do have far too much power.
Yeah.
You know, they have more lobbying power and more money, and they can do a heck of a lot more. But I still have faith that in a democracy, if you can convince
I don't. Sorry.
If you, look,
Keep going.
If you convince everyone of the need for climate change, you can change governments. And I suppose that's the only way I think we can do it. I mean, I go marching on the streets and get arrested. That doesn't actually achieve much unless I can change people's attitudes. And if you change people's attitudes, things can change.
Oh, I do agree with that, because collective mindsets, like I said before, is what's going to create change.
I mean, if we think back 50 years ago, when I started work, everyone smoked in the office, right? There was laws brought in to stop people smoking in the office, but the thing that really changed it was that people said, this is a horrible thing to do. And it was just that feeling within the community that I'll stop doing this because it's not really very nice.
It's not socially
acceptable.
Yeah.
If you take away the social license from the coal people digging up coal, you'll stop them digging up coal.
Well, there's just to get to that, we got to look at, so you've got the situation where people are going to say, but unlike you, it's like maybe some of them like gas. Maybe they want to keep using gas. Maybe they don't want to switch to. Maybe they want to have their house, heated up in, half an hour, not 2 hours. So how do you convince them that?
I mean, kitchens are going to be the big one on that one.
Half the people you can convince with logic.
Yep.
The other half you just have to say, piss off, do what's good for the world, not what you think's good.
Well, this is now, so the corporations have their own thing, but when it comes to the overall population, what is going to happen, I guess, which is what some of them have said in our interviews, what do you do about the 1,000 factory workers that, again, they are working a job for a dirty coal mine? It is what it is. But those jobs are, they're quite, demanded by those workers, and they're happening to energize all the homes that are dependent on them for that energy consumption. So I guess my thing is, what do you do about them? You can't. I don't know if you could tell them to piss off.
Things have to change.
They might get a bit rough.
Things have to change. I mean, when
that's true. Yeah,
I started work nearly 50 years ago, and I worked for BP, and we had a room full of secretaries that sat there typing up your memos. You hand wrote your memos, gave it to them, they typed it, found what was, and then they gave it back to you. You corrected it, and they typed it again. That all went. All those typists went. We used to have tea ladies that came round with a trolley, and they served tea to you for morning tea and tea in the afternoon. Right? They all went, and we all survived. We used to have people that used to look after horses, right? Before we had the automobile, all those jobs went.
But when you think of it, should we go back to horse farts, or is it better using big cars and trucks everywhere?
Now, what I'm trying to say is that the world keeps changing.
That's true.
Jobs come and go, and this is just part of that. We mentioned AI before. AI is going to have an enormous change on jobs.
100%.
Right? And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's going to happen. I think those people the thing is that the coal industry workers realise that it's going to be gone in 20 years' time. Why not do it in an orderly way now and get out of the industry into a new industry, rather than saying, I'm going to hang on for the 20 years, then everyone gets thrown out. Right?
There should be a transition. I would really hope that if we had come to a big conclusion that it was not a matter of if, but a matter of when we change. But as of right now, it really seems like, what can I say? I guess with a lot of issues in society, people, not corporations, no much, but people are deeply divided in which side they're going to choose. So I'm just trying to figure out, if it does come down to this transition, what eventually is going to happen with the so-called 1,000 factory workers. And then again, is the government going to push for so-called renewable replacements, such as solar panels, such as the wind turbines, or using there's another one I heard, another replaceable for energy. Apparently they were talking about there's a way that it can be, if worked properly. It's a salt-powered nuclear power plant.
Oh, I heard about this.
And they talked about it. Now,
Sodium.
I don't know much about it, but they were just saying that if it's managed correctly, it produces a lot more energy, and it doesn't actually cause that much of an impact on the environment, at least not as much as what carbon emissions would. And I was like, have you heard of these?
I suspect what you're talking about is the difference between fission and fusion.
Yeah,
right?
Along lines of that.
Fusion is when you get, now I think I got this right, you get two uranium atoms, push them together and they create energy.
Yeah.
Right? Fission is where you get heavy hydrogen, right, which is hydrogen with an extra proton on it, I think. You push it together and it creates water and energy. That has been the thing, and it doesn't create radiation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's been the thing that people have said that's what we wanted to do. And theoretically, you just use seawater, you get the heavy hydrogen out of it, you put it through the fission, and you get all this energy out. They've been trying for 50 years and got nowhere with it. Well,
Really?
sorry, they have achieved it for milliseconds in a very controlled environment. They had to put enormous amounts of energy into it, but for a split second, it created more energy than they put in.
Oh, okay.
Right? So theoretically, it could work. Theoretically, it's easy, but there's an enormous technological gap in it. It's so difficult.
A lot of maintenance, too much maintenance.
Well,
it's
it's high tech. It's really high tech. It's like
Yeah.
you've basically got an atomic bomb that you're trying to blow up slowly.
that sounds all within a controlled environment.
Yeah, and then that's
A reactor.
The same reaction as happens in an in a hydrogen bomb, right? But you're just trying to control it. There's lots of energy in there, but they've been trying for years. And the problem with the whole argument about nuclear is it's something that people think could be fantastic. We'll wait 30 years to see if we can do it. But you're betting the world on whether you can do it. 30 years is too late anyway.
That's a big issue, the timing of everything as well.
If that started 50 years ago, could have been a good idea. It's too late. And there's a lot of things that we could have had alternatives if we'd started 15 years ago, and our government hasn't accepted those ideas. I mean, you should have been able to look at it and say, we're going to get rid of gas, we're going to get rid of coal, we're going to have all these distributed solar panels and things all over Australia. What's the one thing you're going to need? You're going to need all these power lines to get the power back to the cities. They've suddenly realised now that they have to do that, and they're suddenly realising you can build a solar farm in 12 months. It takes years to put in the cables to hook it back to the city.
Yeah.
And whereas if you'd started early and said, this is where we want to get to by 2030, all renewable power, this is what we've got to do to get there, these are the power lines we've got to do, etc., we could have done it. We wasted 10 years.
And it's all because of our government would rather apparently build new coal plants, from what I was hearing.
Yep.
They'd rather do that. So now it's like, all right, let's slowly push aside changing people's minds and just see, why do we have the so-called mega corporations and these big companies just continuously pumping out all the toxic gas, and yet they know it's bad for the environment, but they need the money. They just need more money, you know?
I think it's all about money, to be honest.
Yeah, money's just...
You know what I mean? Like a massive motivator behind keeping things the way that they are is because of money. Like, did you know, like Al Gore was talking about this, how like there was studies conducted by petrol companies to prove and to disprove that climate change was a thing.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting, considering that the climate change scientists were hired by petrol companies, which is irony. But on another note, in terms of trying to create renewable sources of energy, that's either going to cause less radiation or less pollution. You know what I mean? Like say, for example, like we have nuclear power, which sounds great in theory, but then, when you think of nuclear power, you're thinking Chernobyl, Hiroshima, stuff like that, man. And
Fukushima,
yeah, Fukushima. And that is scary. And then you have, on the opposite scale, like people talking about how Teslas, they're using lithium, which, like I said before, you're digging up lithium, so potentially that's going to cause damage. But on the flip side, you have lithium there, and it's in your car. You're going on massive distances with your car. That's causing potential radiation. You know what I mean? Using technology like your phone is potential radiation. And say if we create this salt-powered machine, what radiation is going to come from that? What radiation is going to come from green hydrogen? All these things need to come into a factor. Not only is it just about trying to create something that's going to create less damage for the planet, but also less damage to the consumer that's using it, which I think is a very, very hard thing to determine, because all of this comes down to one thing: trial by fire. Break a few eggs to create an omelette. And really putting these incentives in front of the government and saying, here, try this. We have a pattern that's working to some extent in terms of productivity, but if you put these ahead, that productivity is going to stop because we need to change everything. We need to abolish all this other stuff and create this new wave of technology, and everyone has to adapt to that. Like people that have got cars, here we have to change all engines to be a salt engine from now on.
Look, I would. Yeah, I was going to say, like, I would agree with you on that, but I will stick with Alan on this one. I feel like, again, 20 or 30 years ago, if they had tried maybe implementing some different energy producers, that could have been a thing. But now it's like, it's just going to have to be. It's a bit too, I don't know if it's too little too late already, but like, as you've already said, we've already got so much of an issue as it is right at stake. Like it's
got so late that we've got to go with what we got.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You're right. Someone's going to make a fortune out of a battery which is cheap and lasts longer. Right? If you could make a battery which was half the price of the existing batteries and lasted 4 times as long, you'll make a fortune. Same way, someone may come up with a nuclear box that generates lots of energy really cheaply. They'll make a fortune. But we can't afford to sit and say, let's wait and hope this happens. You've got to go with what you got, and maybe in 20 years' time, when all of these wind farms and all the things have a life. When you replace them, you might replace them with something different. But we've got to go it's so catastrophically risky. You look back at some of these graphs and they're frightening. You've got to do something about it now. There's one other graph that I should show, which is, I've only just recently seen this, and if I got that the way up, yeah. Basically, you're starting over here. This is the amount of energy that's coming onto the Earth and not going, right? Because, historically we've been in balance. The Earth heat came from the sun and the Earth radiated heat, and they were in balance. This is what it used to be back in 2003. It's gone from that level up to here. What that means is that the Earth is absorbing heat at twice the rate it used to, which suggests that the temperature graph that we had before, instead of being like that, is going to go at twice the angle up.
And this is, so the Earth is actually absorbing energy.
It absorbs energy from the sun.
Yeah.
And it has to radiate all that out. You've got to be in balance or else you heat up.
I was hearing something about this, but again, it was all just speculation. This fellow was telling me that in regards to the solar waves heating up the planet or energy from outer space, be it what it may. He said it was more to do with the Earth just tilting and changing its axis and rotating, which is what he had said, that like he reckons that it had nothing to do with so much of the sun directly, making this the effect. It was more so just because our Earth is just tilting its axis and rotating in a different way. But
I haven't heard theories like that, and it's possible true, and it's possible that next week it'll tilt back again, and this will drop to zero, and the Earth will come back cool.
We hope so.
Cool, right? Vague possibility until I actually see this graph coming down. I don't believe it. There's a really good physical or scientific basis that if you put CO2 in the atmosphere, this is the sort of thing that'll happen. We're doing the experiment now, and we're seeing that it's worse than we thought it would be, and things are just getting out of control. That graph really scares me.
I mean, I'm not going to lie, like the Earth becoming more toxic and the environment slowly becoming an acidic wasteland is actually terrifying. Like, this is a thing. I was just, before I get into that, I just want to ask you really quick, Alan. So if not the dirty oil and coal that we've been using for quite some time, and if not even radiation,
roughly 200 years,
what kind of renewable energy source are we going to turn to? Maybe not just in the world, but what in this country are we going to turn to?
The wind seems to be the most effective.
Yeah.
Because, solar panels are really good for your house, right? Because you can they're nice and cheap, you put them on your house, you generate your own power, you don't need power lines to transfer it around. So that has a usefulness, but it tends to be between 10 and 4, right? That's only when the sun shines. The wind blows for a much longer part of the day, and if it's not blowing in one part of Australia, it's blowing in another part. So wind has a really high basis for it. You've got to have hydro to fill in the gaps, because hydro you can turn on and off as you like.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to have, and that's one, they're doing Snowy 2.
Snowy is in...
Snowy 2. They had the Snowy Mountain scheme.
Oh, right, yeah.
They're now doing it, and basically what they do is they have a pump at the bottom of the hill. They pump the water up the top when they got spare power, and when you're short of power, your water all runs down again and regenerates power.
I see, yeah.
So it's like a big battery. The trouble is it's enormously expensive, and it's actually getting to the stage now that the large batteries, Tesla batteries that they put in, they can put them in a lot quicker, and it's almost similar costs. And I think batteries will be the way that we store energy from the wind and the sun when it's available, and use it later when it's not, because we will come up with a battery which is cheap and long lasting.
We have to, it seems like, because our world's
one
dependent on it.
One of the things about capitalism is that if there's a market there, people will invest a lot of money into develop it, and someone will make a fortune out of it.
But then comes one really big problem with that. I was looking at this was a thing done many years ago. You're aware of the prohibition in the US?
Mm.
Yep, I think it was the 13th Amendment. Alex, have you heard of the 13th Amendment?
No.
So basically, this was a prohibition in the US, how they banned alcohol, right? Do you want to know the real reason behind that? So you got the Rockefellers are dead now, may he rot in hell. But you guys know the Rockefellers were like the big oil barons that run all the oil companies, yeah? Well, basically, at the time, farmers were using their tractors, and they were pretty much using their own moonshine to get their tractors going, right? And what Rockefeller realized was that he couldn't sell his oil to farmers because basically they could just cut his oil out of the market and just keep moonshining and use ethanol to make their own, to get their own tractors running. So what happened was he basically lobbied all of the, you know, big investors or all of the advisors and all the, you know, senators in the government and whatnot, and got them all to say that, oh, you know, they falsified statistics saying that, you know, like, oh, that, you know, moonshining ethanol is bad, alcohol is really bad, and how, like, oil was better and all that. And what happened was they basically passed the 13th Amendment and the prohibition of alcohol in the US to basically force all the farmers to go from using moonshine on their tractors to buying Rockefeller's oil. Now, I mean, that, again, I know it's a lot to say, but that is...
It's a good conspiracy story.
It's allegedly that is one of the reasons why they banned alcohol in the US, to cut farmers out of using their own ethanol, you know, alcohol, because also alcohol produces a lot less carbon emissions than oil, obviously.
I mean, it would.
It's got a lot less.
And it's kind of more natural.
Yeah. I mean,
well, ironically, it's all natural, I guess.
You could literally just drink it and just spit into the engine, and it would just, you know, get it going. But they've changed, obviously, the engines nowadays. It has to be mixed in with a little bit of diesel and you know, to get it going. But back then, it was like you could literally just, you know, pour a bit of whiskey into the motor and it would just start kicking up, right? So basically, it also again makes you wonder something. Why doesn't the US have any, you know, big, you know, supersonic hyper trains like in the Japan, for instance? It's because, again, they need trucks going because it's how their oil, you know, oil and big petrol companies keep everything going in the US. These are robber barons. These are basically modern day robber barons. They cannot afford to have any other alternate energy source because their whole oil and petrodollar industry just goes down the toilet. That's in a nutshell. Like, again, I know I'm a little bit off it now, but I looked into it a bit. I'll say that.
There is a similar story that electric cars were first invented around 1880.
Yeah.
And the petrol industry bought up all their patents
and destroyed them.
Yeah. Just to generate their own thing. I don't know whether that's true.
See, I heard the same thing, but
Wouldn't
in the
surprise me.
80s. In the 80s, there was a guy that invented the electric car. He got killed, and then all of a sudden, Elon Musk, 20, 30 years later, is like, oh, guess what? I've got Tesla cars, you know? I don't know. But on another note, so we got interviews from people on the street, and we just figured this is what they had to say.
Is climate change real? Let's find out. And today I'm with Thomas.
Yeah.
How you going, man?
Good, you?
I'm very well, thank you, very well. We are talking about climate change and if it is real or fake. So tell me, man, what is climate change?
It's a good question, actually. It's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, like, climate change.
The climate's changing.
Yeah, sure. It's changing, yeah.
Every day the climate's changing. I mean, I feel like it's just a process, like it's, you know, whether we want it to happen or not to happen, the climate, the weather, it's always changing, I guess.
I mean, yeah.
Some people say that it's not really, and they say that it's always been the same, like it will go up and down, but it will never get too out of hand. So I'm like, you know, do you think that it's getting out of hand, or do you think it's always just going to go up and down?
It's another good question. Like, to be honest, I have no idea. It can go up and down, but it's like can go out of hand. Like, you know, it lies in the point of view.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Who is responsible for climate change?
Who is responsible? We, the people.
Yeah? You think that you're to blame?
Not me personally, but most of the people, like all of us, all people, yeah.
Yeah, like a collective, like everyone's equally responsible.
The industries, like the
big
people,
factories and industries and the rich people that run them. That's
Money is king these days.
Oh yeah, that's basically how the world works. It works like it's pretty much what keeps the world going. What do they say? Money walks and bullshit talks.
Yeah.
That's the way the world runs, man. When do you think climate change started, or when do you think it started being observed?
Started to be observed. Oh, it's a good question. Maybe like the last century.
Yeah.
Like when the industrialization started.
The Industrial Revolution, that people started realizing a bit of pollution and shit like that. Yeah. I'd say it's a pretty good assumption. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to say, like, I feel as if it's always kind of been around, but nowadays everyone is really like saying, oh, you know, like this is the next big thing. Some of them will go through the streets in crazy situations. I've seen some of them threw himself in front of open traffic to stop cars because he was convinced that the cars were going to kill everybody. Now, again, I was going to say, like, as an individual, I feel bad for him, but I can see, like, in the long term, like, you know what? The reality is that if we don't have a healthy climate or a healthy environment, then, yeah, we might pay the price a bit later on. I mean, I guess from his perspective, but he thinks that we got to do more about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Why do you think climate change is becoming a big problem?
Why is it a big problem? Oh, another good question. Like those questions, like you cannot. There's not a real answer for those questions, in my opinion. Sometimes, like even this, like
throw it in the bin.
Yeah,
Like,
throw it in the bin, but like not using much plastic. Just like a bottle of water, like just
simple
a refill
stuff.
Bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah. The small things make a change.
Small things always make a difference, man. I'll agree with you on that. But I guess that apparently those small things, according to a lot of people out there, are not making a difference, and we got to do a bit more.
I mean, it's hard, like the small things when like the big industries like don't give a fuck that much.
And that's the part that I think is the big concern. Not so much to get angry at myself or you, get angry at these mega corporations that are pumping out a shit ton of
like
toxic waste. They're the big problems.
Why should we, like, how you say, why should we try our, like, when we try our best, like, those big industries don't give a fuck, like, sorry.
Exactly.
For my French, but, like,
No.
they don't care at all.
It's a very good point. Like,
They pollute, those are the pollution, like, makers, not we.
I mean, okay, like maybe somebody farted. Oh, wow, like, that's
Like,
very.
I don't know, like, take an example, China.
Yeah,
Those
a lot of
industries-
factories.
Those industries
Yeah.
there, those factories, they don't really care about what they put out.
They have absolutely no limits on how much they're allowed to do. Meanwhile, I believe that according to all of the main G20 nations, apart from China, Russia, and a few others, all of them, they have very severe restrictions on all of their carbon limitations.
Yeah.
Very severe.
I mean, it makes no sense to, like, when we have really strict regulations here in Australia, for example, when China doesn't give a fuck at all. with the industries. So,
does not make sense at all, and it just makes you wonder why is there so much on us and why none on them? If they're going to present it better, everybody should be doing their fair share. It only makes sense. I'll agree with that. And according to them, if they don't stop or if we don't stop, we're going to be under 10 feet of ice cap water. But we'll have to wait and see.
We have to wait and see, but it's not certain that like it gets cold as well.
Well, that's the thing. If anything, it could be in a reverse. It could be in another ice age.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, Thomas, pleasure.
Thank you.
What is climate change? So, we have here, Ty, is it?
Ty.
Tom, man. Pleasure to meet you.
There you go, mate.
And, pleasure to meet you, man. Tom. So, tell me, what is climate change?
It's a natural occurring event, isn't it? It's happened since the dawn of time.
Climate's changing.
It always changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Natural.
Who do you think is responsible for climate change? Or what do you think is responsible for climate change?
I think it's a natural occurring thing. I don't think we're responsible for it.
Like the sun's responsible for climate change, you reckon? The sun? Let's put a little mic a bit closer to him.
Global warming and the idea of climate change, apparently it comes from a carbon footprint.
So they say.
So if you look at Australia's carbon footprint as opposed to bigger carbon footprints, why is the voice so loud in our area of the world as opposed to where the bigger carbon footprint is? You know?
Yeah.
China, India. All those
Yep, all the
countries,
big factory countries, industrialised, yep.
massive amount of carbon dioxide. Why don't they go over there and talk about it?
That's a very good point. I saw that when they signed that treaty, this was, I believe, the one that happened a few years back. It was just all sensationalized because Donald Trump, he pulled out of that. But basically, it just had a lot of countries in the world cut down on all of their industrial output, yet China and India and a few other countries, they were allowed to keep free-falling and just going for it. So, you know, China's definitely got the most polluted country in the world. China's got the record level of all pollution. It's said that in some parts of China, if you breathe the air, it's equivalent to smoking a pack of ciggies a day.
They're trying to say about, you know, the cows emitting too much.
They're farts, yeah?
Sort of stuff.
Yeah, I heard that.
So if you go back to before we were farming or whatever, the great herds that were in the Americas and Africa and all that sort of stuff, like there used to be like millions of elephants and the great herds of wildebeest and buffaloes and whatever.
Yeah.
And then in Americas, the great bison herds and that stuff. But that's a lot more than we have any cows on the planet today. Probably. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that, yeah.
And then like mankind wiped them out to back to fuck all, a lot of
Yeah.
those herds. And then surely the cows now aren't even replacing the amount of herds that were around there.
Yeah, that's...
I'd like to see some figures on that, you know what I mean? All these people are pushing that agenda.
Yeah,
Because I'm
it's a
gonna
fair
eat
point.
meat, man. If I can't eat meat, I don't know what I'm going to do because I love it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it'd be a very different world, I'd say that.
would be horrible, wouldn't it? So, but you see but do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, no, I definitely see your point.
They've got this thing like in certain countries that cow farts is, you know, it's making global warming or whatever. It's the amount of carbon. I mean, trees store it in their trunks and shit, don't they? And they
Yeah.
need CO2 to breathe to create oxygen and all that.
That's
sort
how
of
they
stuff.
do their thing.
It's like quite a natural balance. I'm not an educated person, but that's how my understanding of things.
The tree needs carbon to grow. That's the, yeah.
Exactly, you know. So if you cut all that out, what's going to happen there? Yeah?
Poor trees.
I can understand if the glaciers, like the land-based ones, if they melt, that's going to add to, you know, water levels rising.
Yep.
But the ones in the ocean, that's if they melt, they're already, the body's already.
The iceberg is already in the water, so yeah.
It's not going to make any difference, is it? And if you think another thing that possibly could, it might be minuscule as well, but increase the water levels is all these man-made islands.
Yep.
That's water displacement, isn't it?
Yep, China's doing a bit, Arabia's doing a bit, yep.
Around the world, you know.
Oh, yeah.
The Asians, the Arabs, whatever, doing it. And then you even think, as stupid as this sounds, water displacement's created by ships and that as well.
Mm.
And it is. Like, you see the size of the cruise ships and all that sort of shit getting around today, the super tankers, rah-rah.
Yep.
I've got a little boat that, you know, put in the water. It's got a, you know, water displacement, isn't it? As stupid as it sounds, it's fucking true.
Yeah, no, a little,
Proof
yeah.
of that.
Of course.
That's like science, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you know, like anytime, you know, a large amount of mass goes in water, you know, it's going to affect it in some way. But what they're saying is that, you know, even if the icebergs melt, the bigger issue is that apparently, if they melt, it will also increase Earth's temperature, which means that we're going to allegedly, because all the things within the iceberg will get released, apparently there's heaps of gases in the iceberg, and when all that carbon inside the iceberg gets released after it melts, that will make even wilder weathers, because it's going to apparently affect the meteorology, which is the weather patterns, and that's going to basically make crazier storms. And I mean, let's be honest, we had a bushfire, let's say about, I think it was 4 years ago now in 2020. It was a really big bushfire we had here. It was really bad. It was like, I think over 1 billion wildlife got burnt, and like some hundreds of millions of acres of land got absolutely incinerated. And they're saying the reason for that big bushfire is because crazier weather, because of climate change.
Nuclear power, man, that's great.
Salt nuclear plants, yep.
Nuclear, it happens to other parts of the world, man. I don't know much about it, but it's meant to be pretty cool. Huh?
Fukushima and Chernobyl had their say, but you know.
But they've learned from all that shit, isn't it? There's still other places around the world where they haven't had incidents, isn't it?
That's a fair point.
So it works. They've proven that it works. I don't know.
I guess at the end of the day, it just comes down to the fact that I think, like you said, if everyone has an idea and cleans up after their own mess, and as long as it's not too excessive, it's definitely keeping the environment clean is like, we should always clean up after ourselves, but we should never allow for like, we have to change everything in our life just because one tree got chopped down. Like, there's much bigger issues, exactly. Yeah.
Would money fix the environment?
Well,
you know what I mean?
They say they need more money to fix it. At least that's what they say. But they want to put up...
more money for cancer too, but we don't see them fixing that.
There you go. See, these are the big questions. They don't get answered. The big questions never get answered.
They just never get
all
answered.
These predictions they had too, they said by certain, 19 fucking whatever, all the predictions they had, none of it's really come true, has it yet? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we're still waiting.
They're going to tell me in 10 years' time, that it all turns to shit. They can't really predict the weather that well tomorrow, can they?
Oh, they never ever get accurate weather. Never.
No. So how can they predict 10 years down the track?
It's a fair point.
Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? Many people didn't know much about climate change. I don't think we know much about climate change in general. You could study, as much as you want, but really it's a very uncertain kind of science, because obviously change is uncertainty. So climate change is also uncertainty. On another note, we did have a game. We wanted to do the whole challenge thing, but I forgot to bring a set of matches, bro, to be honest. But I did like the concept behind it, though. I thought that was great. So we're not going to do a challenge on this segment, but in terms of coming up with different sources of fuel and stuff, I've heard about this guy. He created a car that ran on canola oil, which I thought was interesting because his car just smelt like French fries.
No way.
Performance is very good. Once it's mixed in, you get a slight smell of cooking from the exhaust. But apart from that, no, it's very, very good. And there's no problems, no stalling, no anything. It goes like a rocket, in fact.
Does it sound any different?
No, it sounds exactly the same. But cooking oil has to be clean. If you're going to eat it, it's got to be clean, hasn't it?
On the flip side, you have cars that are running on solar power.
These electric cars are racing against each other across the Australian outback, powered only by the energy of the sun. The Bridgestone Wells Solar Challenge brings together teams from across the world to take part in an over 1,800-mile-long race and push the limits of technological innovation.
So we're driving forward efficient car design, and we're also driving forward solar technology and electrical efficiency in general.
And then you have another one that could potentially run off salt water, which is one of the things that we're going to build, but it's not happening today.
Just a point on the biofuels. The idea of biofuels sounds great. You grow canola, you generate oil, you burn it, and it's a circular economy, and the CO2 gets absorbed by the next patch of canola. It keeps going around in circles. The problem is the amount of land you've got to use to create those biofuels is enormous. And it turns out that you can feed an SUV for a year, or you could feed 10 people for a year. That's the same amount of land you use. So you can either have your SUV or 10 people.
For real, the actual, okay.
And so you've really got to think about, can we afford changing to biofuels, redirecting food, which is what the canola is, redirecting food into driving cars.
Oil made from plastic waste. Hey, take a look at what I made here. This is oil I made from plastic waste. Come, let's see how I made it with this machine here. For microwave pyrolysis in particular, we have to mix the plastic with carbon that we actually make from the process as well. So it's not an extra cost. Now let's turn it on. After some time of the machine being turned on and the temperatures rise, we also get natural gas made from plastic waste, an amazing product that can run a generator that will run this machine itself. Take a look at that beautiful, clean-burning, smokeless...
I have a real issue with whether that's morally right.
Which will now come back to what was brought up earlier on, how when it comes to population and energy consumption. So this is, as
use dead bodies. Think about it. They create methane.
Yeah.
And just light them on fire.
Yeah. And
it'd be a bit weird to fill up your tank, though. Hey, can you fill up my tank? Yeah, that's an arm from 17th century. You know what I mean?
Then guess what? We're going to pump all that carbon and all your methane back into the atmosphere again. So now we're breathing you in.
Oh, bruv.
Yeah,
Talk about being one with your ancestors on that one.
We need to find a way how, which again, I don't know if it's, we would have to, try to consciously achieve this, because throughout human history, we've never really thought about how, too many people's never a problem. We've always just kept, letting it go. But that is, again, because people and leaders were more interested in how do I tell the other leader of that kingdom to fuck off. They're not so concerned about, it's like, me lord, the tide is rising. No, I don't care. I want more of his land because he's, pissing me off. And now it's come like, we've got a situation where we still have those leaders with that mentality, but the tide is rising way quicker than what it was 1,000 years ago. So,
well, I thought maybe if we use seawater, we could create a lot of solve a lot of issues. But the problem is, look, I did this.
So is this to create energy?
Trade energy or to create renewable water source, right? So if you can convert salt water into normal water, then you create problems with water. You could also create another salt powered battery. I thought it would be interesting because when Navy ships convert, say, 5 liters of seawater into maybe 2 liters of fresh water, they have this thing called brine, which is concentrated salt water, which if you can convert that brine into a battery, that'd be great. But the problem is if they put that back into the ocean, the density of salt is fucked up. So all the sea life goes to the top of the water. So creating something like that would be great, in my opinion, because then if potentially what the inevitable is that the seawaters are rising, they're not going to be rising if we're using that as a source. You get me?
I think it's a different scale.
Yeah.
I mean, the rises that you'll see in the sea level, when you spread it over the entire world, enormous quantities of water compared to what you're talking about for the generation. And the technology isn't there to get energy out of salt water.
Yeah, yes and no.
Sorry,
I'd say yes and no.
If it was there, people would develop it and make money out of it. But no one's doing it, and that suggests to me it's just not either technologically feasible or financially feasible.
Or even like Prim Frost, like you were saying, if they could put that, like here's a packet of Prim Frost and then they just put it in your tank. And then it's like fucking nitrous, you know?
But you're talking about a ton of permafrost.
Yeah.
To get a litre of CO2. It's the wrong scales.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And it comes back to it. If anyone could make a buck out of it, they would. No one's doing it. Suggests you can't make a buck out of it.
So how does waste management sit with climate change, though?
Personally, it's on the peripheral as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I mean, because waste management if you don't manage your waste properly, it creates methane, which affects climate change. But plastics don't really play into climate change. And I don't deny it's an enormous problem, but it's different to climate change. And it disappoints me a little bit when you talk to people and say, what are you doing about climate change? Oh, I'm recycling my rubbish.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yes, it makes a difference. Not that much of a difference.
I mean, you're still happy for them that they at least show some care, but at the same time, yeah.
No, I mean, it's just the same way as they're not killing people, which is good.
Yeah, like you're not, we're not going to war just yet, you know.
Well,
But
what about compost? So, like, if I was to put compost into a bucket, that creates methane, right? So why don't you do that same principle, but for an engine?
It's just that you need a lot of compost.
Yeah. I mean, it could
Again,
be possible.
if it was worth it, someone would do it.
one thing
I'd say somebody hasn't. Look, I think the greatest thing that's ever happened is we come up with questions, therefore somebody else comes up with a question, and somebody else is going to come up with a solution. So the idea of this podcast right now is that this conversation is going to spark somebody to go, that's the idea, you know? Like the other day we came up with this, somebody else came up with it, but we thought it was interesting, using a magnet to create a source of energy, you know, which is pretty interesting. But there's other forms of energy that haven't been kind of like mainstreamed. And this solar power thing is the first time I've ever heard of it, but I've heard of similar stuff. You know, and then the green hydrogen thing, that was a massive push in terms of putting that as a petrol station instead of a petrol station, you know? So, I don't know. I think it's
hydrogen,
putting it out there so that somebody else can come up with something, you know?
Hydrogen sounds like a good idea. You still got to put a lot of energy into it to create the hydrogen.
Yeah.
It's much more efficient to take electricity, store it in a battery, and get it back to drive your car. That's about 80-90% efficient. Hydrogen, you lose stuff all the way down the track, and you end up about 30-40% efficiency.
Wow, okay.
So you've got to double the amount of power you generate from on your solar farm to get the same impact on your hydrogen car. And my personal opinion is it just didn't. It didn't make it. If they'd got all hydrogen stations out there and had the whole infrastructure out there, people might have taken it on board. But batteries have proven to be much easier. I mean, I've got an electric car.
Yeah.
And what I do is I drive home. I drive it. It's got 400 kilometre range. When it's got 200 kilometres less, I pull into the driveway, grab the cable and plug it in. Takes me 10 seconds and it's recharged next morning. Takes me, I don't know, 30 seconds. Takes you 10 minutes to do the same at a petrol station.
Yeah.
Right? The whole issue of the electric cars is we've got an enormous distribution system already through the houses, through people's houses. They can charge their cars. I've used, over 2 years, I've used public charge stations probably 4 times. All the other times I charge it at home.
How quick does your electric car charge?
It takes 8 hours. But it was going to stay in the driveway for 8 hours, so it doesn't matter.
I mean, if you're on a road trip, there's going to be an issue.
No,
I
it
guess.
takes about 20 minutes.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
yeah.
you stop, you plug it into the fast charger, you go and have a bite to eat, have a cup of coffee, you come back and it's charged.
There you go.
That's all right, yeah.
So now I just want to really just see that. So if you had to make a choice, Alan, and you had to choose between changing the minds of the people or changing the minds of the corporations and institutions, which would you choose between the two?
I wouldn't choose, I'd do both.
But if you had to choose?
If I had to choose, I would think change the people's attitudes is probably easier.
Yeah.
Because the people can then change the big business.
So I actually disagree. I feel like if we change the institutions and the ones that are leading them, I feel that then they can hopefully lead people into making the right choices, because what I see for the most part is that people are essentially just in a mode where not everybody, there's obviously free-spirited individuals such as yourself, but most people are very just inclined to do whatever they're told, do whatever like they're, obliged by their leader to do. Like they're told to something, they just do it. I feel as if when the leaders at the very top start passing down messages saying, you know, we got to clean up after a mess. We got to make, you know, clean up Australia Day like a big thing again. Even though I know that's not really part of the climate, but it's still environmentally friendly. But I feel like it will start from the top and then go down to the bottom, because right now I feel like I was saying earlier, the big corporations, they don't necessarily care about what we have to say because they're always going to be making a buck. But the moment that their so-called leadership changes and that the wider society starts to follow their lead, then I feel that maybe then there'll be more of a push to transition to renewables. You know, right now it feels like, you know, we can do what we want, but until actual institutions change what they're doing, I don't feel like those corporations have any reason to stop pumping out and getting their factory workers back in to mine more coal. At least this is me, but
I agree. But I mean, on the flip side of this, you know, as an activist, I think that's pretty much what the argument is too. Because as an activist, you're going out and you're protesting to potentially A, spread influence and awareness to people, or B, spread influence awareness to institutions.
Yes.
So I think it's kind of like a weird scale to go on. You know, from a political spectrum, I feel like even the vegan movement and people, you know, go out there with the faceless, you know, with the anonymous mask and say, did you know that people are killing animals? You know, and like people look at them like they're fucking nuts. But the truth is, that's the reality that's happening, you know, and a lot of the reality is like, well, it's not affecting my life, so people just like covering
that's
it up,
the big
you know,
thing.
and just going, you know what, it's not that big of an issue, you know. Like, I think the best way to kind of describe, you know, what's happening is just like, imagine like a huge office and there's like a tiny little fire that's happening in one of the bins. You know what I mean? And everyone's walking past going, oh, you know what, somebody else is going to put it out. Somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else. This fucking fire is getting bigger though. And by the time that anyone really pays attention, the fucking desk is on fire. And everyone's like, you know what, hey, it's all right. It will put itself out, bruv. You know, it's like, it will hit the sprinkler system, and the sprinkler system will put it out, right? And by sprinkler system, this is meant to mean like something like, oh, you know what, hey, maybe climate will solve itself. You know, nature will do it itself, you know? And that's, I think, my conclusion on this whole thing is like, it's so hard to kind of sit there and go, oh, well, if we just be quiet, it continues to happen. But if we decide to do this activism stuff and we keep protesting and we keep creating massive disturbances, it's saying, hey, look at me, because we've been trying to get fucking attention.
We hope you've enjoyed your time here today.
Is that it?
I want to let you know that the library will be closing in 30 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah. So we've got 30 minutes in here.
I was going to go.
We're gonna finish this thing and then we're gonna go anyway. But I think the whole idea behind the protests and stuff, to create a distraction, to say, hey, look at me. We are trying to get your attention. We've been trying by the means of being the political route, by sending you emails, sending you data, sending you everything, and you've been ignoring. And now we're like, well, listen, you're going to listen whether you fucking like it or not. So I'm going to stop in front of the highway. I'm going to create disturbances throughout the whole city just so that for 1 second, you're going to listen to what I have to say. Because really all you give a shit is, hey, worker drones, be little slaves. Let's get productive because we need the money. We don't need productivity so we have better society and better humanity. We need productivity because we need money. And really what this is all about is not about creating a sustainable society in terms of productivity. It's about creating a society for money. You get me?
So I think that we need to hit the big corporations and institutions before we go to other people, because most people are just going to have a stubborn mentality and say, I do what's best for me because that's what makes me my money.
Yeah.
And then going to these, other people, they'll just keep, whatever. But the moment that, corporations and institutions start saying, you know what, let's actually just, we got to stop, or they get changes like, oh, we're now going to transition to get all of our coal factories replaced with solar panels and wind turbines now. All of a sudden, we just get all those workers to now help us set up the wind turbines and work on solar panels on people's houses. Isn't that like a great way to transit? But no, it's like...
Yeah, but the law, like I said, how do you enforce the same thing? Like, say, for example, on the flip side, everything that you and Extinction Rebellion has been doing, you get a seat at the table. And you get to say, here is what I think we should do. Here's how we're going to change it. What would be that and in terms of a bill and in terms of a law?
One of the interesting things that Extinction Rebellion pushes is they have three demands. One is to tell the truth, tell the truth about all of this stuff. But the third demand is to set up groups of people who make the decisions for us. They believe that if you get the common man, 100 people in a room, and you explain to them all this crap about climate change and say to them, how do you think we fix this? Right? If you get enough normal people, they will actually come up with a reasonable solution.
That's my reason for why the corporations have to be institutionally changed. But keep going, yes.
They've done it in several countries. They did it over in Ireland because they were trying to work out about abortion. Ireland's a very Catholic country.
Like yay or nay on
the
that
government.
one. Yeah.
The government said this is too hard for us to handle. So what they said is, let's get groups of people, common people. We'll get them together, and we'll talk about what we do about abortion. What's its good points? What's the other points, etc. And contraception in general. And they got them all there, and they came up with and said, we think we should make abortion legal. And that group of people got up new laws, which were put to the people and accepted. And it was because it came from the common people, not for the people who said they were experts. And so that's why that is a possibility of how you actually get around this problem of the corporations having too much power and governments not wanting to change. You get the people to solve the solutions.
I think that should be with tax as well. They should do that with tax as well.
No, they do that with tax. No tax will get paid.
No, like collectively, that's what tax is made for, right? We pay tax in order for them to do stuff for the society. But anyway, go on.
The instinctive thing is you say, you're right. Yeah. If you said to 100 people, do you want to pay tax or not? And they would say, no, we don't want to pay taxes. But you sit them down in the room and say, okay, you can pay if you pay taxes, we'll give you hospitals. If you pay more taxes, we give you schools.
Yeah.
Right? And they're smart enough to say, oh, shit, all right, we've got to have taxes to have if we want schools. Right? And the people are clever enough to come up with a solution.
That's
a
what I'm
better
saying.
solution than individuals like you or I can. And so I would entrust the people to say, how do we solve climate change?
So it would create kind of like subsets of data, like hypothetically, like you're sitting at the table, you've passed this bill, you're saying, hey, listen, we should all have a vote on what we should do with climate change, right? And then say, for example, like each country is sent like a ballot form that says, hey, this is what we should, what do you think we should do? One box says, we should use petrol. Another box says we should use nuclear energy. You know what I mean? And everyone has a vote, and then they put their ballot in, and then they read that ballot out. Is that what we're coming to?
Look, I don't think, the UN, I don't think you can have people having a world-dominated, sort of a worldwide political solution.
Yeah.
You're going to have countries. The truth of the matter is that the way that this will be solved is that countries will say, I want to put in climate change actions and we'll take climate actions and we'll suffer for that. And if you don't, I'm not going to trade with you equally. I'm going to put a tax on your stuff coming into the country because you're not doing your part on climate change. And it'll be world trade that links it all together and forces other countries to comply.
That sounds like the Russian-Ukraine with the sanctions and stuff.
Look, yeah, I mean...
Very similar.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, if you said to a country, what would you like to happen? The country would say, I would like it that I do nothing about climate change. Everyone else does it, and that solves the problem. You can't do that. You've got to have interaction and say, well, if you don't do it, there's consequences for you. The best consequences we can put on you is via trade.
Well, do that. I think even be better just maybe even just start that with the corporations, which obviously that would rely on I don't know, maybe boycotting that company or corporation that refuses to, meet green demands, like, just like, oh, we're going to just dump a shitload of crap into the ocean or pump out enormous amounts of carbon. It's like, and you're not going to make any transition to green renewable sources at all. Absolutely not. Well, yeah, just put tariffs on them, boycott them. But you see, that's the thing, is that there are virtually no restrictions on what these corporations, factories, and companies can do. There are no restrictions on the amount of pollution that they produce. At least I know that, look, there are some, obviously, they've done the whole climate accord years ago, and now there are like some levels of restrictions. But for the most part, those restrictions are so minimal that it doesn't really seem to change much in the greater scheme of things. Like, oh, we have the whole climate accord, we're going to do this, but it's like, in the wider scheme of things, again, you still have China just pumping it out. You still have America just pumping it out. You still have India just pumping it out. I'm aware that per capita, yes, even we are on somewhere on that scale too, per capita.
We are the biggest in the world.
Per capita.
Per capita. I think the only one that's slightly higher is something like Saudi Arabia, because they burn a lot of fossil fuel.
Yeah.
And
just because of a mining industry, you're right, yeah.
There is an issue that we say we'll go to net zero by 2050, but we're not willing to make any steps towards that. And the simplest steps would be to say no more new coal, no new gas. Our government won't touch it with a barge pole.
Yeah, I think at one point, like they.
So you don't want to get rid of petrol? It's mainly coal and gas.
Coal and gas is what we produce the most in Australia.
Okay.
We don't produce petrol, so I'm not so concerned with it. But sorry, I'm not concerned with it within the Australian context. Within the world context, you've got to get rid of it.
Yes.
But coal and gas, it would be so easy for our government to say what the United Nations has asked us to do. The United Nations came out very strongly and said there should be no new coal or gas. And we've ignored them.
You see, how does anything get done when nations just do what they want anyway? And then
I would also, the other thing that I'd just like to mention is the whole thing about offsets. People talk about net zero by 2050. Right? And that sounds good. We'll get to net zero by 2050, the problem's solved. The problem is only solved when we get to zero, not net zero. And the difference is the way I think it's 20 or 30% of our emissions, we're going to do it via offsets. And there's two sorts of offsets. The first one, which sounds really good, is I've got a coal factory, pumps out a ton of CO2. I paid this farmer over here to grow a tree, and he absorbs that CO2. Perfect. That's a really good offset. The problem is you say to that farmer, how long are you going to grow that tree for? And he says, 30 years, I'll grow that forest, then I'll cut it all down. When he cuts it down, it emits its CO2 again.
That's the biggest issue, is that chopping down forests will actually remove the most efficient consumers of CO2.
And you have to say to the guy, if you're going to grow a tree, you've got to grow it forever. And I don't mean 10 years, I don't mean 50 years, I mean hundreds of years.
We need those trees to go back to being 1,000 years old again.
Those offsets don't work. The other offset is another sort of offset where you say, I've got a tree in, I don't know, Indonesia, and I want to cut it down. And you say, don't cut it down, please, that's going to put carbon into the air. And you say, I'll pay you not to cut down the tree. And the guy who'll pay it is the guy who's emitting a ton of CO2. And they sort of say, if I stop him cutting down his tree, I'm allowed to emit a tonne of CO2. But when you look at it, there's still a tonne of CO2 being emitted. It's not net zero. Net zero would be if this guy bought a real offset from a real guy who planted a tree and said, I'll never cut it down. If the guy in Indonesia wants to cut down the tree, he's also got to get an offset from that guy.
Yeah.
Right? At the moment, we're saying this guy doesn't cut down the CO2, create the CO2. This guy does create the CO2, so it's even. And it's not. He's still creating the CO2.
There's always going to be like that unequal amount, and you've got to try and find ways to make it so that everything is, again, it's all balanced out. There can't be one more than the other. And, well, what can I say? That obviously the government or the institutional powers, they all have different priorities. And it makes sense. I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm saying that it goes back to choosing between, do we hope for others while we hope the best for ourselves? And then you have, if that's not the case, does there need to be institutional change to implement policies and laws that set up so that everyone gets their fair share? And it keeps jumping back and forth between that, because it's pretty clear that, yeah, like, you know, I might do my part, which would be whatever it is, grow my tree, and then someone else is just gonna, you know, get out there, you know, semi-trailer truck, and then go back home and turn on, you know, the heater with full gas, and then put on the barbecue and then do all that.
It just sounds like you know when you clean your house and then somebody walks into your house and just is wearing dirty boots and shit.
Yeah, it's like on
all
a
over the
global
and shit,
scale.
and you're like, well, I just cleaned the fucking house, man. What the hell, man? Like on the global scale, I can see that, but it's like, you know, it comes down to that fundamental thing. Like people just want what they want for themselves. And that's the selfish side of it, you know. And then if you put Marxism into it, you know, the whole socialist kind of aspect, I think that's kind of like stepping on dangerous territory of dictatorship. You know, when it comes to collective, because we have collective knowledge, right? Because we know that this is happening. We have data that says that this is happening, but collective agreeableness and mindset, like I said before, if there's a law, like say for example, you know, like there's 10 people that agree, but there's that 11 guy that's just going, I don't want to fucking do this. Do we throw that guy in jail or what? You know what I mean? And on a different scale, you know, like how do you define war? You know?
10 minutes before we close the library, so sadly it's time to pack up.
Yeah.
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 Look, I agree with the fact.
Speaking
What do you
of Big
do
Brother
with
there.
the last? What do you do with the last people that don't want to come on board?
Yes.
And the reality is that you do what we do every other time. Drunk drivers, we said we're going to throw you in jail if you can't comply.
Yes.
If you're going to throw your rubbish in the river and not obey do what society asks, you got to suffer for it. We just have to do that because that's the only way a society can work. It tries to convince everyone.
Yes.
And get them all on board and act accordingly. I mean, same thing with murder. You say to people, don't kill each other. It's not a good idea.
It
Most people
happens.
comply.
Most
Those that don't comply, you have to have a punishment for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's like, how do you, I guess, define that? You know what I mean? And if, like, hypothetically, like I said, if everything that you've been doing for the last 20 years in terms of getting a voice out there and sharing your word, how do you think that's going to affect the mass scale at the end of the day?
I don't know. I just hope it will. The only thing I do know is that doing nothing will have no effect.
I agree.
So I assume doing something has more than nothing. I hope it's enough. And I hope that, not for me, I'm 70 years old. I've got 20 years to go. I'll survive okay. I've got a 6-year-old grandchild.
Yeah,
she's going to
yeah.
suffer.
Yeah.
Right? She didn't cause any of this, and she's going to wear all the pain. And that's what really upsets me personally.
Yeah. There's really something very significant about how, again, it seems as if why should one person pay for another person's mistakes?
Yeah.
And that's like the biggest thing here is that I see that, you know, okay, it's all done and dusted, but like the biggest question is, well, where do we go from here? Because it's not so much of where we are right now, but it's about in which direction are we heading. And that's the most concerning part about this whole topic, is that it's pretty clear with the whole, like, again, recycling is one thing, carbon emissions are pretty bad, but just having the fact that the environment is becoming increasingly more toxic, the soil's becoming toxic, the water's becoming toxic, the atmosphere's becoming toxic, can only go for so long. It can only go for so long. One day, everyone's going to have to reap all the, you know, consequences of all of this environmental devastation. That's just a fact of the truth.
I agree. And you know what? We're coming to the end of the podcast. And what we like to say, you know, you have your way.
I have my way.
And there's the middle
way.
Thank you very much, brother.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Alan. Pleasure.
Thanks, Tom.